And it's all leading up to the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, appearing before Parliament to brief members on the state of our nation 2 quarters into the year. As already we've entered the 3rd quarter, we need to have a certain outlook, as has been the practice of the norm in the Fourth Republic. We've seen an assessment of the economy mid-year and then usually supplementary budgets being presented. But, you know, back in November, when the Finance Minister appeared before them, he didn't know that 2 months down the lane, we're going to have record cases of coronavirus starting in China, trickling into the United States of America, the European Union, and all of us now facing the threats. What does it mean? We need to do dispassionate analysis of this. And we're here together, myself and Mama Yusawa. Mama B.
Yes, Roland, and I must add that this is actually the first comprehensive fiscal policy statement to Ghanaians after the emergence of COVID-19. We've had the Finance Minister write and speak on several occasions in that interview that we played back to you with George Riafe. But this is the first one where we will understand the kind of damage that COVID-19 has done to our economy. We've got a guest in the studio. Mr. Michael Boateng is Senior Tax Manager with KPMG, the audits firm. Good morning to you. Thank you for being here.
Good morning to you, Mr. Boateng.
Also joining us via Zoom is Evans Asari. He's Senior Advisor at KPMG. And Dr. Lord Mensah is Senior Lecturer, University of Ghana Business School, also joining us via Zoom for this conversation. And so, Roland, we want to start the conversation rolling.
Okay, and so as we start the conversation, I have to ask our guests joining us virtually, which now has become the norm these days. Can you all hear us? Dr. Lord Mensah, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. Mr. Evans Asari, can you hear me?
Yes, please, I can hear you. I hope you can also hear me.
Yes, I can. I'm very familiar with you as well. Only not Mr. Boateng here. But look, familiarity is now a watchword we are with coronavirus. But back in November, when we had the Finance Minister appearing before Parliament, what was the state of the economy? Mr. Boateng.
Yeah. If you look at the state of the economy when the Finance Minister presented the budget, and you look at the objective of the budget, that's the creation of jobs and other things in the perspective, you will see that the Finance Minister actually came up with programs and then projects. You know, we were expecting a GDP growth of around 6.8. We were expecting a budget deficit around 4.3 or so. And then we will have a fiscal, more or less, a cover. I mean, cover for about 3 points, around 3 months or so. So those were very positive things that we were expecting. From a tax perspective, we also had a lot of very positive, more or less, programs to make sure that there were a lot of enhancements in the tax administration and also in terms of making sure that we enhance our tax collection. So those were the key things that we had from the state of the economy as of that time. And as you know, things have really changed. So, and I think that brings us to this conversation this morning.
Mm.
And Mr. Lord Mensah, Dr. Lord Mensah, sorry, holding a PhD is not easy, but when coronavirus hit, we had the Finance Minister now coming to downgrade, so to speak, what our initial variables should be by way of the targets. Can you apprise us of what he said at the time that he addressed Parliament during that period when coronavirus was hard hitting?
Yeah, if you look at the Constitution, in times of situations of things like COVID-19, which is more or less a natural state that can happen at any point in time, the Finance Minister have the mandate to go and request for, let me put it this way, kind of a bridge financing. Now, on May 27th, he went to the Parliament and request for a kind of financing that he thinks coronavirus, has, exposed us to which we may not necessarily be able to make up in terms of revenue, and then possibly a support to handle the coronavirus over the period. So the finance minister indicated that over 15.5 billion revenue shortfall faces the country. And then also COVID-19 more or less also comes with certain expenditure, which is about, let's say, 3 point something billion. Now, the total figure gives us about 21 billion Ghana cedis that the finance minister foresee that in the year we need to spend. Now, if you look at the 2019 budget, which was read with optimism, without any fear or doubt of a natural state like COVID happening, the deficit that the finance minister indicated, projected deficit, let me put it that way, because it was in a budget, was about 18 point something billion. Now, if you take that and relate it to the 21 billion the finance minister requested, clearly it gives you the signal that he still wants to hold on to that, deficit, i.e., keep the expenditure around the 18 billion, and then the revenue that he anticipates to raise around the 65 point something billion, which the difference of about 18 billion clearly faces the country. Now, finance minister indicated that the government will issue bond for which, the Bank of Ghana will buy, those bonds that has been issued at the monetary policy rate that was going at that time during the COVID time. And so that bond was issued, and Bank of Ghana bought into it, for which the government was able to raise the 10 billion out of the 21 billion. And so if you ask me going forward, what we expect, I would say that, yes, the 11 billion that was left, how the finance minister is going to raise that money is what we need to discuss here. And yeah, so that is basically what happened during the COVID.
Well, we've come to a point in time, Ms. Asare, where we know the pattern of expenditure. But before we even said we wanted to go in for these monies from the Bretton Woods institutions, we also do know that some of our key partners had also been affected. Look, that's the reality. Our budget, each year we've read it over the last 10 years, have meant that we need to source funding abroad to be able to finance at least 60% of this type of expenditure. We raise it in grants, we raise it in loans, we raise it in other sort of some multilateral budgetary support. By March, we do know that 30 million jobs had been lost in the United States. It means that it's a no-go area. You can't go to Trump and say, I need more money. The British had also been facing some great difficulties. China, well, some leeway. By April, they were out of the woods somewhat, trying to recover. But it also means that all doors were closed. Mr. Asare, where were we going to get the money? Where have we been able to forage to get something back into the economy?
That's the multi-million-dollar question that I don't envy any finance minister at this stage to be answering, really, because initially we started 2020 with a deficit, as Doctor has said. So we needed to bridge that gap. And then COVID hits you hard and it widens this gap. And so this is the challenge for any minister, finance minister, to resolve. However, I think the most important thing here to note is that these multilateral institutions have really availed themselves to assist, especially the developing countries, to address some of these challenges. So we saw the IMF coming up with a rapid credit facility program, which Ghana immediately assessed. And then we got some money, almost about $1 billion to support these initiatives. So we still would have to rely on these multilateral institutions to support our budget deficit. In fact, it is not only Ghana alone that is struggling to get funding. The United Nations put out an appeal, a humanitarian appeal for about $10 billion to support countries that are hard hit To date, they have received less than 20% of that funding. I hear they have only 1.7 billion out of the 10 billion that they asked for. So we are all going into a pool that is really limited, and therefore we need to find a way to spread this pool to cover everybody. I think the most important question that this situation raises is, should we now be focusing more inward rather than outward? Should we now look at domestic sources of revenue rather than always, going out to the international market to look for funding? These are questions that we need to answer. To date, we are saying that our tax to GDP ratio is very low compared to international benchmarks. Do we need to start asking ourselves, what do we need to do as a country to raise domestic sources of financing to be able, that is sustainable? We are not looking at the ones that are not sustainable, but sources of funding that we can say that we are going to rely on for the next 5 to 10 years to support our budget deficit. So yes, it is a challenge for any finance minister to go to the market to raise funding at this stage. But the hope is that multilateral institutions have availed certain facilities for developing countries to assess and then to be able to help mitigate some of the impact of COVID-19.
Outlook of any country, one of the key indicators would be our currency and how it is doing against the major currencies in the world. And one of the other areas will be revenue collection. You are the tax man, Mr. Boateng. Help us appreciate how much we were hoping that we could collect locally, and then we can also do the analysis of our currency. Okay.
So at the beginning of the year, when the budget that we are working with, we had an estimation of around tax revenue. We're looking at around 46 billion Ghana cedis from tax revenue. Now, even though if you look at it, the total revenue, we're looking at around 66 or 67 million. However, if you take a step back, I think in the grand scheme of things, one thing that we should all look at is, at this point, the key issues that we always worry ourselves with, that is deficit and shortfalls. We are now with what we call not in the normal world. So things that we would have worried ourselves in terms of deficit, in terms of shortfalls, that would have translated into either not the so-called no good macroeconomic conditions. These are all gone. Now, back to your question, how do we now as a country, or what is now being done to actually address some of these shortfalls and how to finance it as a country? If you take a step back, one of the things where we sit as practitioners, we've seen there are other various avenues that this COVID-19 brings to bear that we should all think about in terms of enhancing our tax administration. One of the areas that we know, and most of our research and polls that we always do, is that to make sure that you get the tax administration or tax compliance more friendlier. One of the things you can see is the use of digitization. Now it's making it easier for tax people to comply with taxes by spending less time to comply by being in the house, and they can file their tax online. Another area that brings to bear, which I think we are likely to talk about in this discussion, is on the e-commerce. So that's another area that you may have to look at.
Okay. So I want to bring Dr. Lord Mensah. We're talking about paying taxes, complying, and using the mediums that we have, going digital. But people have lost jobs. There are people who didn't have jobs in the first place. There are people who did have jobs who've lost their jobs. Businesses are not doing well. So how do we comply with the obligations that we have? And also remember the release in utilities that we got as a people in this country. How has that also affected our revenue collection?
Mama, in times like this, everybody knows that economies get restructured. Economies change their, dimensions. Now, if you had an economy where probably agriculture was driving or calling the shot, obviously you know that, your taxes should be geared towards those areas. Now, during this pandemic, we are aware that everything has been virtual. Now, let's not look at, the revenue side alone in terms of, management of this economy. We have to look at the expenditure side as well. Now, if you look at the 2019 budget, sorry, 2020 budget, which was read in 2019 November, clearly there are some expenditure items that are, more or less non-statutory. Now, if I say non-statutory, it means there are things you can do away with, and in times like COVID like this, without necessarily stressing your economy. Now, let's go back to the expenditure side of what we read, the budget we read in 2019 for 2020. Clearly, I observed two items, which for me, I think the government can look at that side and possibly sacrifice, those items. You don't touch on, capital expenditure, because we know we are in election year. Some things that has been promised needs to be given. To win votes and all those. The political aspect of it. But then there's also interest payment and all those, which are statutory. And even that one, we could see some cushioning, when the COVID came from, our creditors. And then also, if you look at salaries and emoluments, you cannot, those are statutory. Now, things like, if you look on the expenditure side, you could see things like grants to government agencies, which is about 15 billion. You can also see other, expenditure, which is about almost 3 billion. Now, if you put those together, that is the 18 billion deficit that we see that we must finance by hook or crook, by borrowing, by raising money from our own market, and by export and whatever, we intend to use to finance this deficit gap. So what prevents us from looking at those items? Because look, these non-statutory expenditure are not earmarked. Grant to state government agencies are not earmarked, expenditure. Other expenditure is also not earmarked. So clearly you see that, those monies, even though will help the economy, but they are funds or expenditure that we can easily sacrifice at this time, just to balance the sheet of the state, so that we can survive during this, COVID-19, and then prepare ourselves going forward. So we shouldn't stress ourselves too much on looking at just as a revenue side, and then think about the expenditure side as well. Somebody will say, but Doc, it will not be politically wise to do that and all those. But hey, let me tell you, we are in a COVID era. We are in a state which is not normal, a state where we need to be conserved as much as we can. Now, let me come to the revenue side, asking how do we, reconcile with these job losses and all those. Now, if you take, the economy as we speak now, I think earlier on one of the panelists indicated that we cannot go out there easily to go and borrow, but rather we should rely on, Bretton Woods institution and philanthropical, funding that are coming to us. I would say that in times like this, every country look inwards. Look inwards for your financing. So I was happy when the finance minister went to parliament to ask for bridge financing, and then as a result of it, the government issued bond for which Bank of Ghana bought into that bond. It's a way of, tapping into your local financing. Now, if you look on the treasury bill market, clearly you could see that, God being so good, before COVID, we managed to bring the treasury bill rate down, which is an advantage. Now, in times like this, business confidence has gone down completely. And so everybody is trying to find avenue for investment. So trust me, if government should go to the market going forward to raise money, right, through treasury bills, government can get it at a cheaper cost, and then at the same time, the necessary funds will be attracted. And so by so doing, we should be able to, get money from our own, market to finance, the necessary expenditure that we need for, we have to do for this country. So, Mama V, if you ask me, basically that is how I see things. But then let's look at the tax aspect. Now, if you take, the economy, like I started my submission by saying that, the economy has been restructured as a result of COVID. Now, e-commerce is what is booming now. Now, telcos are the ones making the money. If the government can assure us that if we increase a bit of taxes in those areas, those institutions or those corporate entities will not pass it on to, the customer. They are all part of, ways that we think, those companies can also help absorb some of the, the pains that goes with this, COVID-19 shocks.
Okay.
By increasing a bit of taxes in that direction, and for me, that should be able to, help the country in a way.
Okay. We'll come back to how we as a people will receive any kind of further taxes in that sector. But before we get to the second bit of our conversation, Mr. Evans Asare, I want you to touch on the effects of job losses on the economy.
Right. Thank you so much. I think it's the scale of the job losses is still becoming clear to us at this stage. I mean, if you look at the hard-hit sectors like the tourism sector, where we are seeing tens of thousands of people are out of job. If you look at the agro-processing sector, if you look at the export sector or the trade, let me put it together as trade, where a lot of these companies are unable to do business because borders are closed. I mean, it is becoming a massive, and a daunting task for any economy to manage that. One, the effect of these job losses also goes back to government because there is the loss of tax revenues from these employees who otherwise would have been paying taxes in terms of, payee and then all other, taxes that may be due to government. Number two, there is also the loss of pension contributions. I mean, speaking to some sources, there is a reduction in the monthly pension contribution, which was quite significant from March, April, up to June because of the job losses. And of course, you and I know that our pension is also very critical to us. And so about 30–40% drop in monthly contributions is quite significant. And so if you put all these together, it has a very sort of vicious cycle where the job losses leads to loss of revenue to government, loss of pension, and then also the economic impact also becomes clearer as these job losses also become clearer. What is interesting to note is that whereas in certain economies, there are what we call the employment benefits where people can register and go and queue for some monthly payout. It is quite difficult at this stage. I mean, the resources that we have are limited. And so what does the finance minister do to avert some of the impact of job losses on the economy? There is a direct impact on livelihoods. I mean, we are protecting livelihoods, but people were at home and didn't have jobs to do. And it had effect on what they would be able to buy and then even eat at home. And so I think it is quite a difficult situation we find ourselves in as we speak. For countries developed countries like the United States, where they are able to estimate the number of job losses. I mean, there were times that they were mentioning figures that are staggering, like 20–30 million people out of job. That is almost the entire population of this country. So you can imagine that if we have that percentage of people in Ghana who are out of job at this stage, how do you manage this? And I think the most important question is, how do we put together a plan to ensure there is a gradual recovery and to ensure that these people gradually get back into employment to be able to, get some kind of livelihood? That is the most important question that we need to
we will throw that back at you later on in the course of this conversation so we can get some recommendations. But we've also been speaking to some personalities, former finance minister said Tekpe has been speaking to us on new taxes, COVID management, and the economy in general. Also giving us thoughts on this is Professor Godfred Bokping. He's speaking about recovery, getting our economy back on track, and the agricultural sector. We want to take a listen to them.
So you're a tax expert. Ahead of Thursday's presentation, the finance minister is saying that he's not going to add new taxes. As a tax expert, if you were in his shoes, will you introduce new taxes?
First of all, we are not going to increase taxes. Was it not barely a year ago, less than a year actually, when ESLA levy was increased, taxes were increased. Was it not just in 2019 that the credit that businesses get, for Get Fund and NHIL, as though it were VAT, was it not only this year that was removed, which is an indirect increase in the VAT rate? Have we not had personal income taxes going up as high as 35? The top bracket 35 reduced to 30. As you sit here, I don't know your salary.
But you don't want to know.
But if I put you in Ghana's middle income, class, right? Ghana's middle income class. Are you aware that your salary and that of many middle income countries, right? Middle income Ghanaians, that was between 10 and 15%, has been increased, and you are being taxed at 17.5%. And if it went beyond that, you would have ended at 25. Your executives.
So in short, you wouldn't have introduced new taxes if you were in his shoes.
No, in short, I'm saying the minister can say so because he has increased the taxes already. He has increased the taxes already. He increased them incrementally. That's why what we have been told, we reduce 17 taxes, and I'm enumerating them for you. I've enumerated 5. He has extended the temporary taxes that should have gone away. They were increased. That's the 6th one. So I'm saying that, no, it's a smart way, another smart way of telling Ghanaians, I'm not going to increase your tax when you have done that thing already. It's been done already. According to the documents given to Parliament, about 2.2 billion Ghana cedis, right, of the loan that we are borrowing, sovereign bond, is going to finance free SHS because, because of the pressure under the law not to use oil revenue. Are we going to be borrowing 2.2 billion annually, even the cities, to finance free SHS?
From all these indicators, do you think government can continue to fund the free SHS with COVID in now?
We are the progressively fee-free. So I can say for sure that if we had continued with the infrastructure, right, and we had built, completed our 200 free SHS schools. People say, but what would have happened? Precisely what would have happened was that we would have finished 200 free SHS schools. Can you imagine the impact of students staying in their community to attend school? Boarding costs will be down, and all those day schools, they will be sleeping on verandas, and other day students who are day students posted outside their homes, and they are sleeping on verandas because there are no boarding houses, no infrastructure. No.
So what should government do now?
The trajectory would definitely be different.
So what should government do?
As somebody who has advised governments, and disclosure, I worked at a firm. You don't give solutions until somebody gives you the figures. Yes, on what are you basing, on what are you basing the advice? So I'm saying, let us see the full cost of free SHS. Let's see where it is coming from.
In my own
estimation, it's going to take us more than 3 years. It's going to. And a good way to understand that is to look at the statement the Finance Ministry made on the 30th of March, where they talked about growth decelerating to about 2.5% or 1.5% given a worst scenario with the partial lockdown. And that has been reviewed. That has been revised downwards again. So I think that, of course, I do not have all the data as they would, but from where I sit, I think we are looking at beyond 3 years.
Okay.
And the reason is simple. If you look at the immune system of the economy, it's not that strong. So we may not be able to have the kind of recovery that other countries should be able to do, also because we don't have the fiscal space. Now, if you look at the various stimulus arrangements, they haven't been that deep. If you look at the revenue envelope, it hasn't expanded that much. Expenditure remains elevated. The real effect of all the interventions we have done will begin to show in the next couple of years in terms of the debt buildup. And once you are not generating enough revenue to be able to even cover your compensation of employees and interest payment, it leaves you with very little to be able to finance the recovery. That is our challenge right now. So I think realistically, we should be looking at beyond 3 years. You see, Inshira, the reality is that when you have growth decelerating from 6.8% to let's say 0.9%, it tells you that you're going to require less input to produce less output. Okay, less input in terms of labor, in terms of capital, and all of that. But when you also see output decelerating sharply like that, it also translates to income losses.
Now,
okay? And it translates to other sectors of the economy as well.
Right. And it's all about recovery and how we're able to weather the storm, so to speak. But then it brings us to the crunch issues. The reality is that where we find ourselves is by force majeure. We didn't anticipate this. Now, we've seen that it looks like apparently there was something good in the economy after all, because over the last 3-4 months, sanitizers were produced. We've had various sectors that are related to health able to do some recoveries by way of manufacturing, etc. Indeed, by 2017, 2018, we've seen some massive growth in industry. And if you look, you pick that by the figures, 6% excess by the projection for 2020. What should we be doing right by way of the empowering or empowerment for the various sectors? And which one should we take more seriously?
Okay. Thank you, and I think I'm happy that we have this positive conversation out of this COVID-19 issue. From our discussions and then from our observations, one of the key areas that need to be looked at is now we realize that digitization is not the way to go. This is an area where it enhances business operations. So, for instance, I was having a discussion with an officer, and we had discussions virtual. I mean, we could have someone from another country being in an office discussing tax issues. This is a case that that person would have to fly into Ghana to have that discussion. Now we realize that people can do a lot of business online. We can, if we increase or enhance our digitization, education, we can do e-learning. That means that we don't need to invest in infrastructure. Now, with e-learning or working from home, you could see that now reduction in transportation and other things. So, but if you take a step back, it involves a lot of infrastructure. So the question is, can we as a country appreciate the fact that this is bringing a lot of good things to us, and can we invest, and then in the long term, it will really change the operations that we work. I think so. When you look at digitization, we look at it from even business. Now, let's come back to my favorite subject, that is taxation. Digitization, actually, with this COVID-19 has really brought a lot of positive things. I made mention of filing returns online. I can tell you that on a month-to-month basis, when we have to file taxes on behalf of taxpayers, we have to drive to various tax offices, stay in queue just to file returns. can you imagine that you can do this within maybe something that we could spend about 4 hours to do? You can use only about maybe 25 minutes. Just email the returns. You can use Swift and pay online. Can you see the beauty of this? And this is something that has been in discussion all these years, and I'm happy this is bringing this conversation to bear. So that looking at the digitization. Now, as you made mention of, now we are using there are a lot of local industries producing PPEs. That is where taxation comes in. How can we give them reliefs? So to make sure that we enhance the operation, to give them something to inject funds in the form of tax reliefs, to make sure these industries are really working. I know the government has been doing a lot of this. For instance, if you look at the 2020 budget, it made mention that for venture capital, there were certain tax exemptions that they were going to have. They will not pay VAT on certain transactions. These were good things. But I think as a country, even though it goes back to the point that when you are giving these reliefs, somebody is saying that we are having deficits because you are not getting the money to fund the operations. But however, I think we should all have the appreciation that this is what we need to do as a country. Because all the other developed countries, when you look at China, you look at especially Japan and other countries, deficits are not something that they think about because they look at the long-term effect. So we as a country, this is the kind of discussion that we should have. So we're talking about digitization. E-commerce is also now a way to go to make sure that now with digitization, people can sit in the comfort of their home and do business. And I heard Dr. Lord Mensah made mention of that. Digital e-commerce and those things. Now, a lot of big businesses are moving into that area. So these are all areas that need to be looked at. But in the backdrop of this, what we expect from tax practitioners is to make sure that our tax laws in line with the e-commerce and e-business is really strengthened. Currently, what we have is just a statement or something, a broad statement saying, if you're having these businesses also, these are things that you need to do in terms of register for VAT and how you collect it.
What specifically would you want or advocate?
What we advocate is that there should be a clearer guidelines. What the guidelines means that if you are providing e-commerce or you're having a platform that people can buy and sell, who is responsible for making sure that the buyers have actually collecting the taxes? How do you make sure that whose responsibility is that, and what are the penalties? Because I can tell you that some taxpayers may go and look at tax law and they ask officers, so give me the guidelines, and there's none. So they may have to look at other areas.
But isn't that why the GRA, Roland, sorry, isn't that why the GRA is there? Because if we are thinking about ways to make this easier on us, and we are saying digitization, then the GRA must certainly also be looking at digitization and be going alongside.
Absolutely, and to be honest with you, they are doing that. But I think now this conversation is saying now let's zoom up.
Yeah.
Now everybody should be on board.
The demand is there.
Exactly, the demand.
Dr. Mensah, you and I have had this conversation about how e-commerce should always have been a priority in ICA. Indeed, the National Identification Authority, after the Kufuor administration went off the scene by way of the governance structure, then it meant that it went dormant. We've resuscitated it. It's been slow. The mason who will build your house or my house doesn't get to pay a direct tax, so to speak, or doesn't get to pay some taxes on whatever his earnings are. It's in cash. Okay? Now, we know that the demand is there. We want to do this, but the database is not available. How do we drive this within this time, speedily enough?
You see, if you look at this country, with the projects that we've been initiating, digital this, digital that, digital whatever you can name them, they are all geared towards, getting a database to ensure that we can easily identify businesses wherever they find themselves, to ensure that the mason who is doing my job, like you said, the plumber who is working for me can easily be identified, attached to their jobs. Whatever earnings they are having can also be channeled through maybe a medium. I mean, mobile money can be one of them. If you go to the MTN as we speak now, I remember I had a transaction and then there was kind of a problem with the transaction. And in the end, I went straight to the office and asked them, can they give me a trail of all the transactions I've done? The response I got was, I need to do, you could see the problems that goes with requesting for such information, for which I know the systems they are using have them. Now, on daily basis, if each and every one who is working is being paid through the digital system, which of course I was going to talk about the consolidation of all these digital approaches that we've been adapting, we've been investing in. We keep on talking about, revenue shortfall, but we are making investment on revenue shortfall. Being cut every day on digitalization of, our address systems, digitalization, national identification card, have we consolidated all these databases that we are creating? That is where the problem is. Now, as we speak now, I don't want to veer off into this dispute on using BEFSET, which feeds into, national identification card, feeds into passport, and in the end, there was a ruling that we cannot use BEFSET and all those. Now, we've jumped on one step further by, establishing a database, which is the national identification card. Have we integrated this national identification card to the digital address system that we commissioned some time ago? These are all investments that are geared towards, enhancing revenue collection. What are we doing as a country? We're spending on revenue, enhancement projects, but then it's not feeding into, that, revenue realization that we're supposed to have, or improvement we're supposed to have. Now, if you ask me, what can we do to ensure that, at the end of the day, if someone works, maybe at the informal sector, somebody works, we can easily capture, his payment and then possibly tax, that payment. The government should work hand in hand with the telcos, because mobile money has penetrated almost every corner of this country. I can tell you the maximum you're supposed to travel to get your mobile money transaction on the average is not up to 3 miles. So for me, the government should use that database. In other parts of the world, what they do at the end of the year is that they look into your accounts, all the possible transactions you've done. They look at it, your inflows and outflows, and then whether you've exceeded a certain quota, and then slap some tax on it. So effectively, we should, consolidate all these databases, including the database that, the telcos have, so that we can restrict transactions through those mediums. And possibly by the end of the year, or possibly by middle of the year, we can track all these possible transactions that, the informal sector have been doing. And then in the end, we can slap, the taxes in that direction. So if you ask me, I would say that we should integrate all the investment that we've done. We should consolidate all the investment that we've done as far as revenue enhancement, is concerned. And it should be able to go a long way to help us.
Yeah, quite interesting point you made there, and all of you would agree. For example, in the UK, you earn outside what your regular earnings are, which is tracked by the system. Then there's a tax on it, and that taxable 40% of your earnings also means that it's what they're able to keep in-country sectors safe, and then even get to have some to even lend to us. But Mr. Asari, in business, we have what we call off-takers. We have markets, literally. All these things that we're doing, we're now in a confine. We've closed 30 million people. We say that give rebates, give monies, give surpluses, or let's say give some funding to etc. sector, etc. sector, etc. What happens when the world opens up? Let me put that to you, Mr. Boateng. What happens when the world opens up?
Yeah. So that is a very interesting question, and I think it's something that, as we are all collecting those benefits and those things, we should all understand that this is not it's like unlimited resources that we are just collecting. At some point, the dynamics will change. The government will need to mop up all these resources to make sure that it gets to what it wants to do. Now, the good thing is that whenever you are giving out these benefits, The idea is that let these businesses thrive. Let them create more jobs. Let this business do well. You get your revenues, you get the government revenues from taxes that it will collect. The employees will be hired, they will pay PAYE and those things, the government will get money. They also have money to spend so that it will also make the economy grow. And I think lastly, it's also bring political stability. Can you imagine everybody is not working? So these are some of the backdrop of some of these decisions which are taken. So in the short term, it's good that when we hear this assertion, give out more money, give out stimulus packages, give tax exemptions, especially like what was done to the frontline workers, to give them more incentivize them to do all these things. There are so many things that all these things are doing that it does in the short term. But in the long term, the government actually benefits. Because when you have more businesses through your incentives, what you are going to see is that you have all these avenues for you to generate your revenue, it brings political stability, and it makes the nation grow. And I think that's what we need to look at.
In the US and in Europe elsewhere, they call it consumer spending. And it's one of the ways by which the economies in the US, EU, China, etc., tend to collect their taxes or their revenues. And when consumers spend, it also means that more money into the economy. Now, when the world opens up, Dr. Lord Mensah, the various concerns that we had about how well packaged our goods and services are will come to haunt us again. How competitive the products that we have on the market will come to haunt us again. And then which market are we sending the surpluses will come to haunt us again. What should we be doing by now as the borders are closed and hoping that when we open up, we'll be competitive?
Yeah, I think this is a typical question of consumer behavior. But then in the end, there's economic aspects that we can touch on. Now, Ghana, we keep on, signing trade agreements, trade, integrations here and there that we've been drumming on. My position has been clear on this. The goods that we try to export, have we tested the local market to see, the consumption level? Have we saturated the local market? The basic economics, it tells you that, before you think about going beyond borders, I mean, apart from, the dollar, benefits that we get, we should be able to, test, the local market. Now, COVID has brought itself. COVID has given us that opportunity. To make sure that the things that we produce in this country, we test them in-house. Now, this, what do you call it, hand sanitizer and all those that, within the COVID, you see how we can think fast during, stressful times. It has brought up new innovations. It has brought up different products. Even some of them, you could see they are not, that good on the market. When you smear them on your hands as if you've smeared some banku on your hand. But then in the end, they are all, a way of preparing us to make sure that we have local consumption packaged to the taste of, the local consumers. And then in the end, over time, once we get our market saturated, obviously we have a, possibility of looking beyond borders. Now, if you produce and the goods are not accepted locally, sometimes selling it internationally, becomes difficult. You have to use the local front to test the market very well, to test the response on the goods before you send them, possibly outside. So for me, COVID, with the borders closed, is an opportunity. It's an opportunity because you cannot easily export. You cannot easily import. So let's produce, in our market, and in the end, test the goods in our market. And with time, as we build up and the borders get open again, these goods will be ready for export. So it is an opportunity that has availed itself. We shouldn't look at COVID as if, it's something that has come to, create, stress on us. In every, natural disaster, there is an opportunity. Now, I can also tell you that in as much as on the budget we are thinking about expenditure, there are some gains that we've made during this COVID. At least government officials are not traveling so much. So some allowances and per diems and all those things, which I expect the finance minister to give accounts of all those things before he even requests for extra funds going second half of the year. So for me, there are some positives in here which we need to take advantage of.
But if we have to speak to the volumes of trade, it also means that by March, we're told that because the CD, we didn't have a lot of the flights, we had even trickled by April to about 5.1, 5.2 by way of its performance against the US dollar. Now we're back to 5.6. It's also because there was a certain leeway we needed to do the imports. How do we balance that, as we know that we're within this period, but ultimately we'll open up?
Okay. So,
because it speaks to a trade deficit that we've always been having that we've not been able to overcome.
Yes.
Or close.
Yes. And I think, as you rightly said, these are the what you call the short-term effects of what we have. But if you look at the long term, and I think if you look at what actually drives our forest deterioration, we could see that our importation of food and other items, which more or less tend to affect our forest. One of the good things that we are seeing is that now with COVID and our borders being closed, we are now sourcing more items from Ghana. That means that things that we don't need to import, we can now use local substitutes, which I'm happy people are using. Now, even look at just before the COVID, we're talking about local rice being consumed. Now, it was a craze. Everybody was consuming local rice. Now, the belief in the Ghanaian products is increasing. That is where now we need leadership. When I say leadership, I'm not talking about political leadership. I'm talking about leadership as we as Ghanaians. How do we see that we take this opportunity to say, okay, these are the areas that we have to use our local resources. And I can trust me that if we do more of using local resources, then which has become the line issue for these forest issues, these issues will address. Recently, we are trying to look at local car production and all those things. These are discussions that we can talk about down the road. But these are all areas that we need to look at to make sure that the underlying consumption of foreign goods are actually curtailed. And I think this is where I always say leadership always comes in.
Well, we have some notable information we've put together. We want to just run that by you. We get to find some of the variables, the statistics that perhaps you can't play in your mind to get to know. For example, the performance of our GDP by the time third quarter it was, based on what the reports the finance ministry had, overall GDP was 6.2, and then the real by June was the time that we had it, based on the statement that we picked or sourced this from 5.2. End period inflation as at the third quarter 2019 was 7.6. It's since been revised, and overall budget deficits on cash basis percentage of GDP was some 4.5. So we've been able to go through this. We had a net import cover at the time of 4, but we also know that by the close of 2019, entering 2020 was around the period 3 months. So we can come to terms with the reality. The medium-term macroeconomic target, we all do know, vastly affected by the banking crisis, which also swelled our debt levels, both the public debt level, overall GDP to grow at 5.7, and you can find also that the primary balance to be in surplus, and the 3.5 months cover also there from 2020 to 2023. It looks like, Mr. Barton, we're still within the reach of, especially the import covers and some of the things that we need to achieve. And if we go through, you also get to find out what the projections were in the short to medium term. And it was just basically to make sure we restore the economy, transform agriculture. And indeed, from 2017, by the post-record 2017, 2018, agriculture had shot up, and then industry had also done very well. And you could also have the finance ministry wanting to revamp the economy and social infrastructure. Dr. Lord Mensah, 2020, we're told, year of infrastructure, year of roads. Just yesterday, the president was in Koforidua. We have a 70 million Euro New Eastern Regional Hospital, and you said capital expenditure, we can't touch it. It's an election year. How do we need to create the balance within COVID?
Yeah, I gave you the signal earlier on my submission, looking at the items on the expenditure side, and possibly, dealing with some of them in a way that will support, COVID budget. In fact, I always say that we should be conserved as much as we can at this time. If you look on the budget side, I indicated that, the expenditure side of the budget, I indicated that we have two items which for me are non-earmark items. And these items, if they go off, the budget or possibly reduce, will go a long way to support, the country. I'm looking at the other expenditure, which is more or less miscellaneous. In Japan, they don't do budget with other expenditure without earmarking an activity for it. If you look at what we call it, the grant to state-owned institutions, these are funds that we can easily reduce, because if you look at the happenings in COVID, most of the administrative activities are the what we call it, the ministries are not going on as a result of social distancing. Printing and all those things are being minimized. A lot of communications are being done electronically. So these are possible gains we can make as a country. And so if you look on that side, I will tell you that the budget is not as scary as we want it if we want to be conserved and want to really balance it, so that the little that we raise in our environment can easily finance the possible projects that we intend to do as a country.
Mr. Asare, I'm told that you're back. Okay.
Yes, please.
Great.
Thank you.
And looking at what the state of capital expenditure has been in election years in the Fourth Republic, it also means that we're expecting it to go up the roofs or the rafters, as the British would say. But COVID has given us, well, some mild expectations. Do you think, based on your observations as somebody who works with your firm, the KPMG, the market, and I'm sure inherent in the market is the demographic or the population of voters, do they think they will be forgiving of the managers of the economy if by November we say that, well, we've been able to incur so much debt, and as a result of that, the deficit has gone up, we've exceeded the 5% threshold, which already looks like what the indications will be? Is that our laxity? Do they have the reception, the forgiveness, the sympathy for us, for the managers of the economy for this?
Thank you so much. I think nobody really asked for this pandemic. It is a natural disaster that we are all managing. And so we cannot say that any government could have reasonably anticipated that this is going to hit us. And so there's no way you could plan for an event like this that we are experiencing. So, I mean, to a large extent, one can say that the government had very ambitious plans for infrastructure development, the year of roads. We know, aside domestic sources of revenue, we're looking towards, China through the, Sino-Hydro facility to support our infrastructural development. And we know China has been hit hard. So, of course, we're going to have challenges, from that side as well. Would you forgive the government? Well, it is a very difficult question to answer at this stage. But if we really take a step back and then we ask ourselves that if any of us were in that position, I mean, what could we have done better, as we see it now? We first need to save lives. That was the most important thing. And I think it was made abundantly clear that we can work on the livelihoods later, but we need first to have the people to be alive.
Looks like we've lost Mr. And is the markets receptive enough for this?
Yes, I think at this stage, really, it is really being able to package projects that are attractive. For me, I don't think it is government's responsibility alone to drive our infrastructural projects. I think we must look towards private capital, be it public-private partnership, because we have not yet developed that aspect of our infrastructure development, leveraging private capital through this PPP. We've been talking about it for a number of years now.
Mr. Asari, what do you mean? That PPP will mean that they should partner the state or government, construct roads, and then they toll it, like they did in the UK, etc. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, it's an example, but we need to look at our infrastructural, needs. We have, rails that we need to build. We have, roads we need to build. It is not every road that you can toll. I mean, government can come in with some kind of viability, gap analysis to decide that, okay, for this road, it is not possible to commercialize it in sense of tolling it to generate revenue. But what can I do in terms of providing subsidy to make it attractive for a private, firm or a private partner to be able to come into the infrastructure development? Government cannot do it alone. Trust you me. Government can have the fantastic ideas about infrastructure, about roads, about rails, about airports, about ports. If you look at our ports, it is not all 100% government financed. We are leveraging, private capital. And then based on that, we also leverage some commercial lending to be able to support our infrastructure development. And so for me, it is important we look at private capital and we create the enabling environment, then, conditions locally to be able to attract this capital into our country. Remember, the World Bank is estimating that foreign direct investment is going to drop between 30 to 40%. And if that is true, and it's going to hit us very hard, then we need to find ways to make our economy attractive. How are we packaging the infrastructure projects that we have so that it makes it very viable? And if it is not viable, we put conditions in place to make it attractive for capital to flow into the country. And that is what we need to be thinking about. So in the recovery process or in the road to recovery, we need to look at to have a rethink about how we are financing infrastructure. If you look at our budget, capital expenditure is about $9-10 billion compared to interest payments of over $20-something billion. It is a very massive, difference. Can you imagine if we're using our interest payments to support infrastructure development? That is $20 billion, which is about almost $3.54 billion going into infrastructure. If we're using $20 billion to build our roads, our rails, I bet you in the next 10 years, we'll be able to bridge that infrastructure gap that we currently have.
I love your thinking. And MPS, for example, that new port there is an ideal PPP situation that we can cite. Great testimony or case in point. But look, we want to expand this conversation. And for the next about 20 minutes, we'll be talking jobs. We're talking about effect on industry, etc. And Mr. Solomon Kote is the General Secretary, the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union is joining us. I see you. And Mr. Kote, thank you for joining us. Please unmute.
Good morning.
Great.
You're a panelist.
Great. I love your sitting position. You're joining us for 20 more minutes. So try and hold on, okay? Great. But from where you sit, I see you. You are the mother union of industrial workers. How many job losses have you recorded so far?
So far, we can talk in the range of less than 1,000. Less than 1,000 because most of the employers as of now are really struggling to put every employee on hold. The mass job losses are coming from the casual workers. And because we don't have data on them, we are unable to give figures. But those directly with the ICU, we can confidently say over 1,000. They are coming from the hospitality center. This is where we've lost most of the workers.
Hospitality.
Yes, we mean the hotels, and then the restaurants and the caterings.
Just on the practical way of asking the questions, we all have friends. Some work in banks, some work, etc. We also do know that some are supposed to work from home. Some have been asked to take half salaries, quarter salaries, or some cutoffs. Do you have a record of how many as well have been affected by that?
Yes. What it takes is that if you take the entire hospitality center, no one is receiving 100% salary. What, in fact, the employers have done is that they are keeping hope against hope that by September, October, maybe we will get into the normal situation and then resume work. As of now, all those hotels over there, about 23 of them, they are paying 50% or half of the salaries that these workers were having before. So in that region, we can talk about 7,000 workers in that particular half salary situation. And then there are others also where the employers realize that they can't continue with this new normal. Hence, they have closed down entirely, like New Rest Catering and they have been done the redundancy, pay everybody off, and they are looking at it. Meanwhile, other companies are also looking at similar, closures because the closure of the borders is leaving the market situation only to the internal, and the internal market is also not enough to keep their businesses running. But all of them, we say kudos to them. They are looking at what can we all do to support each other, and that is where we find ourselves. And to the last bit of your statement, most of the workers are also working from home, and then maybe 2 days you are off, you come, 1 week you are off, you come. This is also affecting the kind of productivity that the employers want to have, and hence we are all terrified that by October, if this thing don't get stabilized, we don't know how the real negative impact of COVID-19 will have on the employment role in Ghana.
And with my little knowledge in economics, I do know that productivity has a great relation to output, negative or positive.
Yes.
Now, that will mean that by that September that you are in contact with the employers, they would make some drastic decisions. Based on your own analysis, what have you envisaged, or do you envisage will be the decisions that employers may have to take by the next quarter?
Well, much as we want to look very positive and trust that things will work well, from what we are seeing, sales is not too encouraging. From what we are seeing, even unions have decided not to even negotiate in this year to ask for any demands at all. And yet the employers are really finding it difficult to survive this particular third quarter that we are entering. Hence, if by the October, as we have looked at our books and we have looked at the situation with all other sectors of the economy, we might be facing some serious redundancy challenges.
I'm asking you this because, just go to halftime. I'm coming. Let me ask my analyst in the studio. So, Mr. Boateng, this thing you've heard, you envisage this because you were foraging the market, right? You're scouting, looking for pieces of information here and there. One thing we do have is that there's no available data. So we have about 1,000 affected directly, okay? 7,000 who are taking cutbacks in wages or salaries or whatever it is that you want to call them. Then there are those who come in, that's for them, they go 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, casual. So it's affected or influenced by the labor law.
Exactly.
What does this tell you?
So what this tells you is what now can be done to salvage the situation, because that is when we look at most of the stimulus packages which are likely to roll out to certain industries.
But the stimulus is not supposed to be used to be paying salaries.
Well, let's take a step back. Let's look at the backdrop of where we are now. If you look at what happened in the U.S. during the 2008, when they're having the mortgage crisis, you hear the economist or the president of the United States saying that let's spend. You need to spend to take the economy out of recession, and I think that is where we are now. We need to spend to take the economy from where we are.
Consumer spending.
Exactly. Let's not look at deficit, the typical macro issues that we are known. And that is where you are likely to see, taxes not being, using rebates and reliefs to give more people disposable income to spend. Then let's assume that now you give a company who is having 7,000 of its employees half salary, on a half salary basis. Now they have a stimulus package and they are able to be able to keep all these employees in place. The government is going to get the taxes. The company is likely to be profitable. It will pay its taxes. These employees who are now going to have their full salary will spend. There will be VAT being generated. So these are the key elements or the multiplier effect of some of these decisions that whenever we are looking at, we have to look at them from a broader perspective. Because whenever we are in that situation, you need to spend, or you need to have more policy that will stimulate the economy. So that is how I
so you envisage it as well. Dr. Lord Mensah, what you've heard from Mr. Kote, what does it tell you? Dr. Lord Mensah? He's gone for a cup of tea.
It gives me the signal.
Okay.
I mean, I've heard a lot from him, and I can conclude that, you see, if you look at our hospitality industry, which a lot of the job losses are in that, domain, I would say that, I mean, it's the packaging. You see, most of these hospitality industries are packaged to attract, foreign patronage. I think, they need to have a balance of, if you have 1,000 rooms, a typical example, and 500 is for your local patronage, and then the other 500, which is, giving it the ambience to attract, foreign patronage. I think at this time, they would have been, somehow, some way in business. Now you have a hospitality industry which is operating, and everything you see in there is more or less, for foreigners. Now that borders are closed, they're facing a problem, and as a result of that, they had to lay off, people. I always say COVID-19 has come to, give us a big lesson, a lesson that we should learn how to package our businesses. I understand the capital investment for most of these, businesses are from outside. So therefore, they need to generate, dollars to meet up with the input to the business. But then we should also learn that the business is operating in a certain environment, an environment where, when borders are closed, you may never have, patronage. And that is exactly what is happening now. I foresee some of them that they don't need to completely come at a halt. They need to repackage. For now, if you have 1,000 rooms, all that you have to do is possibly convert maybe 300 of them for local patronage. And I think, the local market is still, functioning. I mean, some way, somehow, even though you might not get it as expected. So for me, it has to do with packaging. And going forward, we have to learn from this so that when we are faced with situations where we're not getting the target market, we can, restructure to meet up with the, the alternatives. So I think that is what I have learned.
Mr. Sari, just about 3 weeks ago, I went to sleep at Sky Plus Hotel. It's a 2-star hotel, I believe, in the Volta Regional Capital of Ho. And they gave me a discount. And I asked, is it a discount because I'm Roland on TV? And they said, oh, no, it's a discount because of the period. Is that something like that you think should be? We need to diversify or do the tweaking of the business model now?
Absolutely. I mean, the hotel industry thrives on occupancy. So the more you have people come through, your facility, that is when you are able to drive your business. So whatever marketing strategies that they need to now start thinking about to get, visitors to come through the rooms, because that is really what would drive the demand for food and beverage. That's what we're going to drive it. Because now conferences are on hold. So you cannot bet on conferences, international conferences, where you would have a lot of, foreigners coming through. So what you now want to be looking at are, domestic tourism. So if you're probably traveling to the Volta region for whatever, for leisure, then you might want to spend some time in a hotel. And the only way to attract, people to come through is to look at the rack rates that they are charging. Sometimes you see the rates and you're asking yourself, as an ordinary, even middle income person, would you be able to afford some of these rates to go and sleep in some of these hotels? So they now start, now that you are cutting even down on costs, maybe staff cost is coming down, you are not operating all the rooms. So we give an example. So some rooms need to be shut because there's no way you can be cleaning all the rooms because they are not going to be occupied anyways. So you are cutting down on costs on certain areas. So you need to look at your pricing too. What can I do to be able to make some of these rates attractive to domestic clients? Because now you're not having the foreign clients to be able to bank your hopes on, when you can even do some kind of a cross-subsidization where you charge less for domestic tourists and then you charge a higher for those that are coming from outside. So these are ways that hotel industry may need to start evolving to be able to go through this pandemic. There are some of them within the value chain, the tourism value chain, that are definitely going to go under. The airlines, some of them are going under. If they're not going to get any bailout, then they are going to find it difficult to be able to come back. But if you have made capital investment into a hotel building now, and these are purpose-built structures, you cannot overnight convert it to, say, an office block. It is not possible. So you now start thinking about, how do I utilize the facilities that I have to be able to generate some income that will keep my company afloat? For now, it is not the question of being able to make profit. It is being able to keep your employees, to be able to maintain them at a certain level, keep your operations going at a certain minimum level until things turn around, and then you can start racking up things as you expect it to be. So this will be my thinking as to how the hotel industry can start planning for some kind of a recovery through the difficult challenges that we are going through now.
Yeah, I know, right? And you said for so-called middle class in Ghana, even affording some of the rates, sometimes I keep on, I think only except those who work for the tax auditing firms, like KPMG, they can afford every weekend. but that's just on the side. And look, we have all the people, we have financial analysts, we have the tax experts, we have the auditors, we have the economists, and then we have even the trade unionists who look after the workers and their welfare right here, helping us do some great discussions. And I tell you, that's why we have to take a break, because as we take the break, make sure you go scouting our social media platforms. We have Facebook, JoyNews on TV. We do have a Twitter handle at JoyNews on TV. We also do have our YouTube channel, which is streaming this live, JoyNews TV on YouTube live, and then myjohnline.com will give you all the updates. It's the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, in the Chamber of Parliament, our own legislature, to brief us on how far we've come, 2 quarters of 2020, and how coronavirus has hit us hard, but looking forward as we make entry into the 3rd quarter, the 4th quarter, what will the outlook of the economy be like? We'll take a break, but not before this. The Ghana National Association of Teachers, NAT, is launching its NAT standpoint on education as its contribution to the quest for quality public education delivery in Ghana. Make sure you're part of NAT's drive at empowering teachers and learners for the greater good of our country, Ghana. This event is taking place at the Teachers Hall today, the 23rd of July 2020 from 11 a.m. And the guest of honor is the Reverend Professor Emmanuel Ladobin. He is President, Presbyterian University College of Ghana, and the reviewer is Professor Dominic Mensah of the University of Education, Winneba, and attendance is strictly by invitation. Social distancing protocols being maintained right here. NAT, development starts with people and their education. But look, they will be using a number of items, sanitizers, etc. One institution or firm that produces this is Golden Finger Industries Limited. They are a fast-growing manufacturing company processing fruit into quality organic cosmetic products, cleaning and disinfectant, and these are all produced right here in Ghana under certified FDA conditions. They have in stock the GF hand sanitizer, the GF rubbing alcohol, and antiseptic GF Jetol, the GF multipurpose liquid soap, GF hand washing soap, GF antiseptic cleaner, the GF multipurpose glass cleaner, and they are located at the Giselle Estate, SCC DVLA on the Wager Road. Make sure you hit them. They have some good phone lines, always reliable, 054-6274-070, 054-6273-990, and their landline is always reliable. And it is 0302-957950. We're taking a break. When we come back, greater analysis. What has been revealed by Mr. Solomon Kote, who heads the ICU, about workers, 7,000 now home, receiving half or partial salaries and then 1,000 who have lost their jobs at all, and the casual ones that they can't even account for. What does it mean to you? After the break, all this analysis.